Hello and welcome to Motorform. Today I'm showing 10 tips, tricks and secrets about the Mercedes SL 107. They are interesting for every driver of a Mercedes SL and especially for people who are thinking about buying an SL 107 now and who are not yet very familiar with the little tips and tricks. Have fun! Let's start with tip number 1. How do I actually open the hood? This is easy for anyone who has owned their SL for a long time. However, for someone who is not familiar with this model, it can be a game of patience. That's a bit special. I'll show it. It starts very normal by unlocking the footwell on the driver's side. That's nothing special yet. This is the same with every other car. But now, where is the latch? At Mercedes we are normally used to, at least with the sedans, an opener pops out when you unlock inside. You pull this latch and then you can open the hood. But things are completely different with the SL. There's nothing here, zero. Where are the bars now? Now, how do I get the hood open? There's nothing here anywhere. Nowhere. There's nothing. I don't find or feel anything here. No latch. This can be embarrassing if you don't know it. But it's very simple. You take your left hand, grab the star at the top right, and then simply move your fingers towards yourself. And there is the latch. Very nice to see here again. But it only works if you know it. Let's move on to tip number 2. Operating the windows without the ignition key is something that is not possible on many vehicles. At Mercedes it was properly set up like this in the mid-70s. When you open the door, a circuit is closed and you can operate the electric windows using the switches without a key being present. Simply operate the window switch, no key in the ignition, and it still works. This is an interesting thing if you just want to check the functionality. Let's assume you're looking at a car you might want to buy and the key is in the seller's pocket. Then you can still do it.
Und der Schlüssel befindet sich in der Tasche des Verkäufers, kann man es trotzdem machen.
Tip number 3. The top just doesn't want to open at the back. It has already been unlocked at the front, but it doesn't come up at the back, despite turning the crank. By the way, this is also a problem with the hardtop. Many cars were delivered with a hardtop and many have it installed when you pick up the car from the seller. You just can't get it down. The most important information is that there is another lever under the top crank, and this lever operates the central top lock. So when the crank was moved backwards, the top of my vehicle opens immediately, but this doesn't work for all cars. Then I have to move the little chrome lever here, and this chrome lever operates the small hook at the back under the chrome cap. This is the central closure. The shutter is tensioned by the crank and the small chrome lever opens or closes it. And the Bowden cable, which is located in the convertible top compartment, is not properly tensioned, then it can happen that you have to push the lever really far or have to turn it over so that this catch hook opens completely. If it doesn't open completely, you'll have a major problem with a soft top, getting it out, and even bigger problems getting the hard top off, because of course there is a solid edge there and it's difficult to push it with a screwdriver or something like that. That's why I recommend checking often to see whether the Bowden cable in this convertible top compartment is still properly tensioned and whether this lever still fully opens the catch hook. This is really important, otherwise you won't have fun. Tip number 4, the jack. There are two things to note here. First, where's the jack actually located? You also have to take this into account when purchasing. Is the part even included? After all, this is an important tool in the event of a breakdown. The jack is not located under the trunk mat, under the spare tire. No, there is a compartment on the right for the warning triangle and also for the jack. By the way, I also think of a great secret when I take this opportunity, which many people don't know. Under the jack, let's take it out, there is a base for the jack, but this base is multi-layered. If you now take off this cap here, which is a bit fiddly, especially if you still have this pump here, then there is a note underneath. This is the case with every SL in the 107 series. There's a data card hidden there at this point. Many people don't know it, and that's why the data card is often still there in cars, even where there were no other documents left. Unfold carefully. I don't think it's ever been out. This data card contains the additional equipment, such as in my case, my absolute favorite equipment, namely code 262, meaning removal of the rear spoiler. This is a special feature of the 500 SL, which was not available in the USA, by the way. The 500 SL always had this thick rubber on the back of the trunk lid. All other information is also on the data card, such as the color of the paint. In this case, I don't know if you can see it, it's number 199. This stands for a blue-black metallic, a kind of graphite black, and here the code 271 stands for black genuine leather. That means the 2 at the front stands for real leather, and the 71 or just the 7 stands for black. So that means together black leather. This is how you can read everything. Of course, the 199 and the 271 are also on the badge under the hood. But here is this original document again, and it is at least over 30 years old. My car was built in 1989, so it is 34 years old, and the data card is still lying there. If everyone knew that, oops, now I've told everybody, then it would probably be missing by now. Because people are taking it out and put it aside in a file folder. The file folder disappears during the move and it's gone, so on and so on. It's best to leave this data card where it was. And that's why mine goes straight back there. The Mercedes jack looks like this. That means it has a thorn. This is also why the two large holes at the bottom of the sill are there. These are no drain holes. There are drain holes in it too, and they are also very, very important. But the big holes are really the jack sockets. If you use the jack, push it all the way in. It is very important that you push the jack into the opening all the way to the end. Then you can get the vehicle up. Of course, secure the car against rolling away and so on. A second story is very important in this context. And that is very, very, very important. I can't repeat it often enough. Down here on the vehicle sill, there are two folds, two sheet metal folds. One is the curved outer sill and the other is the box-like inner sill. One profile like this and one square profile. They come together like this, and the bottom now looks like showing a heart on Instagram. But no, that's not what it's meant. It's supposed to be a sill from a Mercedes SL. The two come together at the bottom with a metal fold. It is the same on the top side, but a stainless steel panel on top covers it, so nothing happens there. Below, however, the sheets are simply dotted together. There should be no pressure on it. Of course, if I go under these folds with a jack now, then they will open slightly. And when they open, moisture forms in them. And if moisture forms in there, rust will soon appear, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then we have the problem that we'll soon have to repair the sills, and welding the sill has two big disadvantages. Firstly, the sheets are very thick. This is 2 mm thick sheet metal. The sill supports the vehicle because it doesn't have a fixed roof. The thick sills down here have to support everything. That's why they have to be that solid. When you first start welding, things can get complicated to obtain perfect gap dimensions. You then have to have the work done by somebody who really knows their stuff, especially if you have to remove the sills completely. A second aspect is value retention. An unwelded vehicle is of course more valuable than a welded car. That's why you should definitely avoid, for example, placing a trolley jack directly under the sills. There are other areas for that. There's a box frame at the front, and you have at the back mounts for the rear axle. This is where you put the lifting platform for the jack. All other areas should not be used to lift the car, or you can just use these jack holders.
Diese Wagenheberaufnahmen, die originalen Wagenheberaufnahmen für den originalen Wagenheber, wenn man jetzt keinen Rangierwagenheber zur Hand hat. Wirklich wichtig, immer dann denken. So, kommen wir zu Tipp Nummer 5.
Now comes tip number 5. Cars with a backseat, if original, still have a kind of luggage compartment. Why? Because Mercedes was so clever to produce the original rear seats foldable.
Weil Mercedes so clever war, die originale Rücksitzbank klappbar zu machen.
SL owners who don't have the original rear seats but rather some thick mattress-like reproductions do not have this option. But with the original rear seats, it is always possible to fold them down.
Aber bei einer originalen Kinderrücksitzbank ist es immer möglich, diese umzuklappen.
You lift the latch here and then you put it down. And if you put a back on top of it, it has a carpet on the back, then you won't destroy the leather upholstery with any sharp underside of the travel bag. Or if you absolutely have to put a beer crate in there, then you can fold down the back seat as well and the leather remains intact.
Rücksitzbank umklappen und das Leder bleibt erhalten. Tipp number 6. How do I get the damn headrest off? There has to be a lock there. Yes, there is, but it is hidden, as is typical for Mercedes. It is located at the back of the backrest. The backrest is made of leather or fabric hardboard, and in this hardboard there is a hole somewhere relatively high up and a little to the left. Underneath you feel that there is somehow a pressure point, and you have to press this pressure point. You have to put your thumb there. Yes, it is very difficult to move it. You have to use a lot of force. So you first pull the headrest up a little, then you go with your thumb, press it, and then you can pull the headrest upwards. Now it's loose. It's hard to do, but that's the only way to get the headrest off. Nach oben abziehen. Jetzt ist sie lose. Geht schwer, geht aber. Das ist der einzige Weg, die Kopfstütze abzubekommen.
Now a practical tip. Tip number 7. There is a typical breakdown scenario with Mercedes models from the 70s and 80s. You are driving your car normally and suddenly it stops. What happened? You start again and the engine starts again, and you can continue driving. Then it works for a few weeks, no problems. Suddenly, while driving, the engine stops again and it doesn't start again. Then it takes a moment and then suddenly it starts. Then it stops again straight away. This is actually a certain sign that the fuel pump relay is broken. Depending on the year of manufacturer, the fuel pump relay is located either under the cover in the passenger's foot well, above the fuse box, or in later models behind the glove box insert. On some models, if it is still the original insert, there is even a small door, but most of the time it's too fiddly. You have to take the whole insert out and then you can get to it. The fuel pump relay is located from the inside of the bulkhead dashboard. This is ultimately a circuit board and there are solder joints on it, cold solder joints, which can be resoldered if someone has a soldering iron and knows a bit about electronics. Anyone who has ever repaired a radio can resolder it. If necessary, you can of course also buy a new relay from us. Motorform has the right spare part in stock for many models. Resoldered relays last a few years, then the problem occurs. But this is a typical scenario when the car suddenly stops and you have no idea why at all, and suddenly, as by magic, it starts again. This is often caused by the fuel pump relay. When the car has warmed up, for example, you park in front of the ice cream store that I so often mention, then it can sometimes happen that when you get back in after a few minutes and want to start it, it takes a long time for the car to start. It turns and turns and turns, and at some point it finally starts. Strangely enough, it starts well when cold. This is a different, very typical scenario. At the back of the fuel pumps, there is a so-called fuel pressure accumulator, which is basically a simple part. It's not electric. It is purely mechanical part. The fuel line is on one side. Inside, there is a spiral spring and a membrane. It is a pressure can that regulates the pressure in the fuel line.
Wie bei diesen Kaffeemaschinen, wo man den Filter durch den Kaffee drückt. So, und dieser Federmechanismus, der sorgt dafür, dass der Kraftstoffdruck in der Kraftstoffleitung immer perfekt ist. Und wenn diese Druckkammer praktisch,
if the spring or membrane is broken, the fuel pressure will drop and the car will have difficulties starting. A new pressure accumulator costs about €150 or about $170. It's a small investment that's worth it. Constant starting can damage the starter motor, and the new starter motor is much more expensive if you can still buy the starter motor at all.
Das geht auch irgendwann mal auf einen Anlasser und ein Anlasser ist wesentlich teurer, wenn es den überhaupt noch gibt. Kommen wir zu Tipp Nummer
8. This is about the central locking, and the car was actually always delivered with a central locking system. In the 70s, it was a purely pneumatic central locking system. About here, there is a large vacuum element in the fender, or was it on the passenger side? I don't know exactly. Whatever. There are these typical yellow lines everywhere that run through the entire car, and through negative pressure generated by the engine, you can practically apply negative pressure to the locks and the trunk lock and even to the fuel filler flap. And that pressure moves the bolts, locks the vehicle or opens the vehicle. Later in the 80s, Mercedes decided to install in an additional pump in the trunk, so that if there was enough power on the battery, this game of opening and closing the central locking system would work again and again, even without the engine running. Only later did the central locking system at Mercedes become completely electric, as it was the case with many other brands in the 70s and 80s. Pneumatic is a bit more elegant because it is much quieter. If you have an early car in which the locking works purely pneumatically, then it may be that after the 6th or 7th time of the vacuum is gone, and then you have to start the engine again to make the locking work again. This means that the lock on the door still works mechanically, but the passenger side no longer opens, and neither does the trunk by central locking. This is because the negative pressure is no longer there. You have to start the engine briefly and restore the pressure, and then it works again. But that's actually not at all what I want to tell you. Sorry, I'll show again. Anyway, closed, open. You may hear the pump briefly, but I think it's still quieter and more elegant than the cluck, cluck that many other vehicles have made in the 80s, when central locking suddenly became available on many cars, and then you heard a flop flop, and I don't think that's particularly very elegant. I always found Mercedes to be really well designed, closed, open, Now it's like this. If you have personal belongings in the trunk, for example, then you, of course, can leave your SL with the soft top open, somewhere without that strangers can get to the trunk or to the glove box compartment. Because the glove box has a lock. You can easily lock it with a key. But the trunk, which can be opened by central locking, could cause a problem. For example, if I were a thief and saw an open car, I would open the door from the inside. Now it's completely closed. The roof is open, the thief reaches in, opens the door from the inside, and the entire central locking system is open again. That's bad, because now the thief can also get into the trunk and steal bags. Of course, Mercedes was aware of this problem, and that's why they fixed it. In addition to the possibility of controlling the entire central locking system via the trunk lock, there is also a second option of manual locking the trunk. You simply set the lock with a key to the horizontal setting, so simply turn the key 90 degrees, and then the trunk is locked.
Auf horizontale Einstellung, also einfach 90 Grad den Schlüssel drehen, dann ist der Kofferraum verschlossen.
If I open the door here, the door is open, and then go to the trunk is still locked. This is a very important function. And the trunk only opens again when I actually open it with a key. I open the center locking from here and put the trunk lock back in the vertical position. This means that now everything works centrally again.
Und jetzt ist es wieder zentral gesteuert. Das heißt, jetzt funktioniert es wieder so, dass ich hier abschließen kann. Kofferraum ist zu.
If you want to park the car open, you should always remember to lock the glove compartment lid and the trunk manually. By the way, the fuel filler flap is also controlled via the center locking. Of course, the whole thing also works completely from the passenger side. I know there are many cars out there where it no longer works properly. These are signs of age, but the way I just explained it, that's how it worked originally. That's how it has to work, and that's how it can be restored. Let's move on to tip number 9. This is about another small problem with the Mercedes series of the 70s and 80s. The instrument lighting often stops working. The speedometer and the other two instruments are dark suddenly. This doesn't necessarily mean that all the bulbs suddenly burned out at once. Sorry, my neighbor is waving at me. Hello? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to somehow take the whole thing apart to get these bulbs. No, that could mean that the dimmer that is in there, the sliding resistor, is corroded. Please just turn the dimmer back and forth a few times to brighten and darken the areas, and then all 3 instrument lamps may suddenly light up again, especially if 3 lights do not work at the same time. That's a pretty unmistakable sign. If only one makes trouble, it's definitely a bulb. It is advisable to turn this dimmer for the instrument lighting every now and then to prevent corrosion from forming on the copper windings. Let's move to tip number 10. It's also about doing something regularly so that no rust forms and the thing stops working at some point. It's the foot parking brake. Many people who are dealing with an older Mercedes for the first time ask themselves why the car doesn't have a handbrake. At that time, Mercedes considered it safer and sensible to equip the vehicles with one so-called foot parking brake down here in the footwell. Click, 3 notches, 4 notches maximum, and the car can no longer be moved. If you want to move it or let it roll again, then you have it here, that famous knob just to the left of the light switch. And then the brake is released again. This brake acts on the rear wheels. And not on the disc brake, but on the drum brake. Yes, wait, the SL has 4 disc brakes. True, but the rear disc brakes also have a drum brake inside. That is the parking brake. So if you now press the foot brake, then the rear brakes in the back, inside the disc, as I said, there is this drum, then the brake is operated. And well, almost all SL107 cars are automatic. Yes, there are of course 350 SL, 280 SL and 300 SL models with manual transmission, but that is rather rare. Most SLs in the 107 series were certainly delivered with an automatic transmission. Most people, when they park the car, just put the automatic transmission in P, in park, and then that's it. Almost no one applies the foot parking brake. But you should do this from time to time because the mechanics have to keep moving, remain, otherwise it will rot. This is another important note for simply maintaining this classic car and almost more of a care instruction. But the foot parking brake itself is so unusual for many car owners that who haven't driven an old Mercedes before, I thought I should include this into the listing. These were the 10 little tips, tricks, and hacks of the Mercedes SL. But there is another little goodie. This has something to do with the fact that I said that some people might be currently looking for an SL. This is a bit of an extra in addition to the 10 tips. To do this, we open the hood again, and that's what it's about. If a rust-free, absolutely rust-free car is offered, of which there are quite a few, and you can find absolutely no rust when you inspect it, which is good because there is no worse than rust on the SL. Everything else can be done well, but rust is always bad. Unfortunately, many cars have rust because they are 40 or 50 years old, and that's inevitable. It's just metal. But if you have found an absolutely rust-free example because it was imported from Arizona or California, for example, then I would like to give you a hint here. Look under the blower motor cover. Underneath is the blower motor, and that sits on a sheet metal base, and this sheet metal base, a steel frame, still tends to rust. This is the case with a lot of cars that look perfect but have not been restored. You really often find rust there. If the previous owner or seller of the car agrees that you can unscrew this cover, just shine a flashlight on it. There is a lot of dirt and then rust, almost always. My car, I know what I'm talking about, was also absolutely rust-free and accident-free. Anyway, we found a bit of rust under this cover.
Und trotzdem, da unter der Abdeckung haben wir dann ein bisschen Rost gefunden.
Yes, unfortunately, this is a fate that almost all SL and SLCs have to face, unless they are really cars with few miles and that actually spend their lives in a garage. Then it may be that you won't find any rust. If the rust is not severe, rust converter is usually sufficient. But you can use it as a selling point to perhaps bring the price down a bit. No, that's just a little tip. So that's it from me. I hope there was something interesting for each of you in this video, and if I have forgotten an important information or important tips and tricks about the SL107 series, then please write them into the comments. Otherwise, as always, I'm happy about a like and a subscription, which is free of course, and then I'll see you again in the next video. Bye bye!